And I knew there were newer methods. So I began to study. The newer methods have to do with visualization and imagery. And that has ended up what I've been doing. But I found out as I worked with this, there was a lot in the normal hypnosis that did not need to be there. It's time-consuming. They don't need it. And so I began to take out things and replace it with other things that I found worked. As long as you're not harming the client, you're free to experiment. Because somebody had to start this in the beginning anyway. Somebody had to figure out how to do it. So I said, most of the people out there who are teaching hypnosis are just repeating what they were taught by somebody else, by somebody else, by someone else. They don't even question why they're doing it. They don't question how they could do it different or why they are doing these different things. So I began to adapt my own technique. And this took place over, it had now been 30 years. And I've been many years perfecting it as I found what worked and what didn't work. And now I'm teaching the technique all over the world. And more and more people are learning it. Because I had so much demand on my time, I knew I was never going to be able to do all these sessions. The list was just getting longer and longer. The only way I could do the sessions was when I was traveling and doing lectures, and I would only have a few days in each place. And then I finally opened an office in Huntsville, that little bitty town over there, and I'm seeing people regularly. I've had that office now for 3.5 years. But before that, it was just, I'd have to do it on the road. So and I'm going to tell you who they are, they told me to start teaching. They said they didn't want me to travel so much. I was on the road every week to a different conference, and sometimes 3 in a week. Sometimes I wouldn't even come home. I would just go from city to city doing conferences. And it was getting stressful. And I was under a lot of stress. And they were telling me, we don't want you to travel as much anymore. We want you to teach and to write. And I said, well, if I'm going to teach, that means I'm going to have to travel. And they said, no, let's do it when you're right here and let them come to you. And I said, they're not going to come here. So I started teaching in here in this hotel. And they were coming from all over the world. So that's what they want me to do, is focus on that more. So I've cut my lecturing and traveling back now. They said, don't try not to do more than 2 a month. And so I've got it down pretty much to that. But I still go all over the world, and I go out of the country at least once a year, take at least a month or 6 weeks that I'm out of the country. Because the books are now in about 20 different languages, and they're being translated into more all the time. So I have to go where the books are. And this last year alone, I spoke in India at the International Hypnosis Conference in New Delhi, and I got to see the Taj Mahal on that trip. But then I went back to Russia, because Russia is translating more and more of the books, and Amsterdam. And I gave my first class with a translator in Moscow last year, and I didn't know how that was going to work, but it seemed to, I guess they got the message. It was a class of doctors over there that I'm working with. Doctors and psychiatrists are wanting to learn this method. I am working with a group of doctors in Moscow who are trying to unite all of the natural healers, herbalists, healers of any kind all over the world. They want to put it into some basic organization to where it will be accessible all over the world. And I think this is going to be very good. And these are regular doctors, and they are switching over to the alternative. And this is what they're trying to stress. So I'm busy doing a lot of things anyway. But the classes have become important now. But when I began the technique, what I developed, I work in the somnambulistic level. If anybody knows anything about trance, as PMH was showing you the levels, this is theta, the deepest level before you fall asleep in delta. Now, most hypnotists are trained to work in the very light levels. They say, you don't want to go near that somnambulistic level. Strange things happen there. Well, you read my books, you know strange things happen there. But they're afraid they can't control it, so they don't want to work in that level. But to me, that's where all of the knowledge is and all of the information is. So I put the people into the deepest possible level of trance, which is the somnambulistic level. Now, they say the odds are 1 out of 20 or 1 out of 30 people will go spontaneously into that level when they're having a hypnosis session. Well, the technique that I've been able to perfect, it's the opposite. 1 out of 20 or 1 out of 30 will not go. I found a way to make every one of them drop. And you see the importance of this because you can eliminate the conscious mind interference. If you've ever had hypnosis with the light levels, you know, your mind is sitting there jabbering at you. This is silly. You're making it up. You read it in a book. You saw it in a movie. Yak, yak, yak. You can eliminate that conscious mind interference and go direct to where the information is. Look at what you can get. And that was what I began to do, and I was very excited because in the early days, it was all about exploring history. I love history, and I had people going back to different time periods. To me, it was like time travel, because when they're in the somnambulistic level and they go into a past life, they become the other person totally. This life does not exist anymore for them. If you have asked them a question about an object or anything in their time period that is our time period that does not exist in their time period, they won't know what you're talking about. And you've read my books, you'll notice this. There are many times that I will say something and they want to know what it is. What are you talking about? So, and that's a challenge too. I found just about everyone I've taken to the Middle Ages, and I would mention the word glass when we're wanting for descriptions, you don't know what glass is. And they'll say, what is that? And you have to think off the top of your head, how do I describe something that is so common to us, but it's unfamiliar to these people in another time period? But to me, that's so fascinating to be able to do that kind of research, because I consider myself the reporter, the investigator, the researcher of lost knowledge. So I want to know everything about everything. So you can imagine if you've got a person into a time period in history, what you'd want to ask them. I want to know everything about them. And then when I write the book, I research it to death. Only after I'm finished, then I find out everything about everything dealing with the subject. And that's where I love that. To me, to be in a library and doing research is heaven. A lot of you wouldn't think so. But I can spend all day in a library looking for one little piece of information, and that is where I really come alive. I love that. When I wrote my Nostradamus books, I read every book ever written on Nostradamus. When I wrote the Jesus book, I read every book ever written on the Dead Sea Scrolls. But that way, even if I don't use it all, as I did a lot of repetition in all these books, I know what I'm talking about and I know what I'm writing about. And I know PMH appreciates this because of her love for research. But that was what I was doing in the early days, was the history, because that was what they were doing, going back to historical times. But even in the somnambulistic level, when I call time travel, if the person, they're not always going to know everything. They may just be a farmer out in the field, but they get the answer for what they're looking for in the therapy, because we take them to the lifetime that is the most appropriate for the life they're living now. They won't always know a lot, but occasionally I would find somebody in a position who had knowledge that we could write about. They knew things that were happening or were associated with an important person. That's where I've written those books, but I've now done thousands and thousands of people, and it's amazing the way the technique keeps going, and it is working every time. Now, a lot of the information PMH got, I received my way, and I admire her with her scientific lust for this. Mine comes from a different direction, but still, if we are getting the same information, I think that gives it validity. It has to be coming from the same place if we're all getting the same information. Doesn't matter how it happens. But mine is not channeling, but I have discovered a very strange thing happening with it that I use now all the time. In the beginning, it was just history. Then I got into the therapy. What I work with, I call the subconscious mind. But it's not the way the psychiatrists define the subconscious. Well, their definition of the subconscious is a childish part of the mind. What a lot of hypnotists use when they're trying to stop smoking, lose weight. To me, that's boring anyway. I'll put it in if the person wants to stop smoking or lose weight, but that's not my prime interest, because to me, that's so easy to do. I found a very easy way to do it. I tack it on at the end of the session. But that's not the part of the mind that I'm working with. I have found this part, you may call it the higher self, the higher consciousness, the oversoul. I think it's what the psychiatrist, what was it, Jung? I never remember if it's Jung or Jung. He called the universal mind, before he got away from all of that. It is something that is so huge and so big, it has the answers to everything. So why not go to something like that if you want to find answers? And it's so amazing to me. I call it the subconscious. It answers to it. It says, we don't care what you call us. We'll work with you. It doesn't make any difference. But so I call it the subconscious. One time I asked them, who am I speaking to? And they said, you could call us the collective if you want. It always kind of makes you think of the Borg on Star Trek. But it is a force, it's so huge that it knows absolutely everything. So that's the part that I work with. And I found it only to be accessible when I get the people into the deepest possible level of trance. I take them through their therapy first, because we're looking for the cause of something. I do a lot with physical problems and diseases, illnesses. They're just about every kind of physical thing you could think of. I've had people come to me. Many of them are getting ready to have operations. If they can get to us before they're going to have the operation, they won't need the surgery, because we find out why they're having it done. Because you make yourself sick. You give yourself the disease or the illness. If your mind is that powerful enough to make you sick, it's also powerful enough to cure you, what you understand. Because I found every ache, pain, symptom of the body is the subconscious trying to give you a message, trying to tell you something in the only way it knows how. Pain. It's going to get your attention, and we don't understand what it's trying to tell us. So it'll get a little worse, and a little worse, still trying to get your attention. And if we still don't understand what it's trying to say, it can end up with an illness or disease that's going to be a lot harder to fix, usually into surgery or all these drugs and things. The doctors are only putting a Band-Aid on the symptoms. They're not going to the cause of the person's problem. This is part of what OT was writing about also. You're going to find out, why did the person choose to make themselves sick? And people can come in to see me and talk about different parts of their body they're having trouble with. I can usually tell them what's happening in their life, because the subconscious will always affect the same part of the body to give the person the message. It's very literal. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. And so that's why we go back to the past lives to find out, why are they doing this? Where's it coming from? A lot of it comes from trauma, the way the person died in another life, and they carry that forward into this life. But, even, I'm not hard to watch my time. I don't have as much time as I gave the other people. But somebody comes in with back problems. It's always the same thing. Shoulder, back, down the spine, especially into the lower back. Can you figure out what that would mean in this life? The subconscious is very literal. I always ask them, do you feel like you're carrying a load? And they usually are. They got a job they don't like, they got a marriage they don't like, and they're too busy, they feel like they are carrying the world on their back. The spine is your support system. And usually that's what it goes back to. Sometimes it's just understanding what it is. People with leg, knee, ankles, hip problems, it's usually the same thing. They are at a crossroads where they're being offered a chance to go a different direction. It may be a big change in their life. It might be something they are not sure if they want to do it because it will give up something. And they're trying to make up their mind, do I want to do this or not? And they're holding back. By holding back, they create pains in those areas. And people end up with knee operations and hip operations, and it's just as simple as trying to find out what it is and make them make the decision. Now, this side of the body, the right side of the body, refers to now, things that are happening right now in your life. The left side of the body is holding on to things in the past. So if you have pains on that part of your body, it's something to do with letting go of something in the past. And then all these things have been told to me in my work. That's why I go with that's the past, this is the now. Arthritis in your hands. What is it you don't want to let go of? What are you holding on so tightly for? See how literal this is? And a lot of times, I spend at least 2 hours or more just talking to the person before we ever have a session. Just doing therapy, getting to know them. And then it's like, what's going on in your life that's creating this? And sometimes they'll say, I don't have any problems. I just thought it'd be interesting to come, and have out of curiosity. But after we talk for about an hour, then they'll probably say, well, I do have something bothering me. Because they got to get to feel comfortable with you and know you, and then they can begin to tell you their real problems. So I do a lot of work with a physical. Now, that's what I'm talking about, the subconscious is this big oversoul, higher self, whatever you want to call it. I call them they, because they always refer to themselves as we when they communicate with me. They said, we can help unless the person has had an operation. It's because if something's been taken out, we can't put it back, which makes sense. They can do a lot. I have seen them in one of my classes just a few months ago in Chicago. The whole class watched as they rebuilt the cartilage in this woman's knee. She was due to have a surgery the next week. And they said, well, you know how difficult this is? And I said, I know, but I know you could do anything. And so they rebuilt the cartilage in her knees. And afterwards they said, no, she's going to go back to the doctor and they won't find anything wrong. And it was a lot. We were doing the whole thing. And then even during the session, it said, well, let's just do I call it a body scan. They said, let's do that and see if there's anything else. And they said, well, we're going to work on her heart while we're in here. And I said, what's wrong with her heart? They said, she's got a murmur. I said, that's not that bad. They said, yeah, well, we'll fix it while we're here. And but because she was due to have a sonogram before she had the surgery anyway. But anyway, see, when these people wake up, they have no memory of what's going on. That's what I mean. You get that conscious mind out of the way. After she woke up, we had 20, 30 people in the class all crowded around the table watching her, had her on a massage table. And afterwards they said, you just performed a miracle. Don't you know you just performed a miracle?